right, hello. We are here now, Creative Co., and we are here on our Women in CPG interview series. And today we are interviewing Natalie Albrandi. She is one of the co-founders of Nali Consulting. So welcome. Thanks, Natalie, for being here.
Thanks, Megan, for having me. So good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. All right. Well, we'd love to kick off with just a little bit of an intro with you. Tell us a little bit about the work you do for CPG founders and what you do at Nali.
Sure. Thanks so much, Megan. So I'm the founder of Nali Consulting. I started the business about 3 years ago. So it's a consulting business focusing on startups and small to medium businesses within FMCG wanting to go from concept to commercialization for their innovations. So we support on everything technical. So that's R&D, quality assurance, the whole supply chain, the full kit and caboodle, I like to call it, to help support launching of your brands and getting them into the market in a nice, smooth manner. We have very global outreach, but we do focus a lot of our clients on the US and the UK, which is where we're predominantly based.
Awesome. And what was your path like to get here? I don't know if we've ever had this conversation, but I'm curious kind of, how you got here and got to this place.
Sure. It's a fun story. It all started when I was 4 years old.
Wow.
So my father is a food and beverage scientist. So I didn't have, the normal upbringing of going and playing outside. I went to the lab and I would smell different natural flavors and I had to guess which berry they were. So that sort of prompted me to be like the weird child at the dinner table, just sort of talking about antioxidant content and blueberries. And my family was like, we need to just get this energy geared towards anything related to food. So it was a pretty clear path from a very young age.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the brands that you work with, tell us a little bit about, some of the brands you work with. I'm always curious if you have like kind of a favorite or something like a memorable experience that you've kind of had with any of the brands you've worked with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're all memorable in their own way. But a lot of the startups I'd say we work with, it is their first time launching of a brand, first time starting their own business, and first time getting into FMCG. So it's generally a lot of firsts. So we're sort of like their shepherds in the industry. A lot of our clients, are bootstrapping. They haven't raised capital yet. So they typically, hire a consultant like ourselves, and then we hire people like yourselves to help support on the graphic design process. And then between the two, we get the product out into the market. But when I think of, different clients that are sort of like shining out to me, we've got a client currently that's launching a low sugar sweetener based chocolate in the UK, and it's just fantastic branding. It's called Lazzies. We're really excited about the project because it helps navigate some of the new laws that are coming into place in the UK, which relate all around the obesity epidemic and how we can have lower fats and salts and sugars in the marketplace. So it's a product that can deliver on that, but still giving you a tasty treat when you want to have an indulgence. And the branding and the brand as a whole and the mission is just really exciting and great to work with.
That's awesome.
That's
I was recently traveling kind of through the UK and over to Greece, but I had to stop in London, and I was just looking around all the like stores in the airport, just looking at branding and different brands that I hadn't seen before. And it's so interesting, like the different like styles and design and things like that are happening over there. So I'm curious to kind of know from your perspective, because you've worked with brands in the US and the UK and kind of all over, what you see like are the differences in terms of branding, or even how brands are like approaching their target audience and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say the big thing is either going for like the full colorful path. So very like fun millennial pink, pastels, bright colors, going down that route, or the other route, which is like ultra simplistic, ultra minimalism, keeping to just a couple of colors or just black and white, and having a strong brand name and not many claims on the packaging. Those are sort of the two routes that I'm seeing. But of course, based on the UK, there's not as many claims, I would say, as there are in the US. So the packaging does generally look a bit more simplified. With the rules here, you don't have to have the sizing on the front of the pack. You can choose to do so, but if you want to put it on the back of the pack, a lot of clients, I would say, do that just because it makes everything look a bit cleaner on the front. So from a branding perspective, those are some of the differences between the US and the UK.
Oh, that's so interesting. Claims
That's
are
really
such,
interesting.
yeah, claims are such a, like, that's what we talk about so much in packaging. There's so much time spent on just what claims should go on the front, what shouldn't. We were recently giving a presentation, and one of the questions we got asked were, because a lot of trends we're seeing is, more simplified, like less clutter, kind of less things going on the front of pack. And one of the questions was, how do you decide what kinds of things should be put on the front versus, maybe could go on the back or don't need to be as front and center. So claims are such a topic.
And it's always changing. Like the rules here are always changing. So it's like once you do one version of your packaging, we have to have this on here, we have to have this, and it's like a year or two later, it's like, oh, well, we don't have to have that anymore. So let's like, declutter it.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the big differences I'd say between the US and the UK too are that in the US it's so forward to have as many different types of certifications as possible. Think of like the Whole Foods movement like 10 years ago. You want to see non-GMO, upcycled, vegan, etc. So it's really common to see a lot of that on the front of the pack or back of the pack, but predominantly in the front, whereas in the UK, it's and across all of Europe, certifications, we certainly have them here, but they're not as quite forward and in your face on the packaging as they are in the US. It's not sort of part of the process for consumer choice.
And some of them are expensive, like the non-GMO and or certified organic, like those are expensive and they're hard to get.
Yeah.
Would you suggest I guess talking like early stage startup brands, when would you suggest that's like worth going for or not?
Yeah. So I pretty much always advise not to go for it in the beginning. It just slows the process down. At minimum, you're looking at like 8 to 10 months for a lot of these certification processes. And if you don't have the formula ready to go basically from day one, then it's going to slow the process down. Whereas, in the beginning, you don't want to be spending as much capital on getting your business out the door. You want to fail fast, right? So keep things quick decision making, don't have as many certifications, do a full proof of concept. And then once you've got that, then go back, of course, formulate the product to meet those standards, but we can just get those going sort of halfway through the process rather than doing it for the first round of packaging. It's something that we could do as a soft transition for a second round of packaging, put some of those promotions up on social media and through the website. But generally for getting it out the door, there's so much that happens, with launching of your first brand and your first couple of SKUs that you don't want the headache of going for all of those different certifications. And typically, if you're going to go down that route, you have a lot of certifications in mind. Like it's not normally like, oh, I just want one. It's no, we want vegan, we want gluten-free, we want non-GMO. And so to do all of them is expensive as a process, but that does typically correlate a lot of the time to what your revenue is as the business starts. So yeah, it's something we advise, put it on the table. It's nice to have, do it for the second round, but first round, speedy, get out the door, get on the shelf, get up on the website and call it a day.
That makes sense.
That does make sense. It's interesting too that you say like multiple rounds of packaging, like phases, because that's something we talk about with clients as well. Is kind of like, okay, the first round we kind of say similar, just get it out there, right? Get something out there that you can start getting some feedback on, and then you can come back and do a next round. How long would you say, because this is a question I've gotten before from other early stage founders, especially, how long would you say kind of it's worth? Is there like any sort of, I guess, guideline to, okay, we've got our first round of packaging out. How long should they kind of be testing before coming back to do like phase 2 of packaging?
Testing out in the market or?
Yes.
Really depends with each brand, and of course how much packaging they have available. But generally speaking, we try to advise, keep your packaging orders at minimum, have as least amount of wastage from first trials as you can, and then, see how it goes, see what, is the dog of, let's say, 3 SKUs, where consumers actually buying, and then put your efforts behind those products and see if you need to go back to the drawing board, if the communication is clear. But yeah, having the product out in the market for 6 months to a year, depending on what your turnover rate is generally a time frame where you're going to get enough feedback to understand if you need to make packaging revisions. But a lot of the time, unless you want it to be a write-off, just go through the packaging, don't waste it, and then go through another round of packaging, see if you have to rebrand at that point, but keep it low to begin with and just push it out the door.
Do you find that there's certain types of products that need more revisions than others? I'm just curious.
Yeah, if the concept is not super clear. So if the brand positioning is not incredibly clear, and it might be clear, internally, and that's something that we try to support on as well, is making sure that we're communicating of what's in the product really well. The positioning is really clear. We know what the competitor landscape looks like out there. But if it is an entirely new category, that's where you're going to have the most difficulties. We were working on some projects last couple of years, where it was a whole new category, and it was between sort of fruits and ice. And people were like, where does this sit? What does this do? What is the positioning of it? What's the consumption? And the packaging, was beautiful, but people were confused. So it's good to try, if your product's very clear, like if you're producing something that's already existing, like a protein shake, then I think you can sort of just hit the ground running. But if it is a whole new category, then that's really the times that you're going to want to put more effort in behind understanding like clinical trials. Do consumers actually understand what this packaging looks like and what the brand positioning is?
That makes sense.
That kind of ties into one of my other questions, which is, obviously we do branding and packaging design, but I'm curious, kind of in your experience and in your expertise, what would you say, makes a great brand in this industry? That's a big
question. Yeah.
It's a very loaded question.
So loaded.
Sorry, going back to your question. So for me, I'd say the brands that are really trying to be incredibly innovative and breaking that glass ceiling, those are the brands that I champion, out in the market, even if it's from like a branding side or from an ingredient side, sustainability. So those are the brands that I would say are really kicking ass out there.
I want to talk about sustainability for a second, because it's huge, and I know it's a value that you guys love working like working with sustainable brands as well. So what are some ways that you guys help brands kind of, and I know you on your website you mentioned working with brands throughout the entire supply chain to find sustainable solutions or to have sustainable solutions. So what are some ways that you guys work with brands in that?
Sure. So I don't have her with me today, but my champion, Ella, is my sustainability guru. So her background is in agribusiness and sustainability. So going from like the seed all the way to a raw material, and then I'm a little bit on the raw material into a finished product side is a little bit of our split. But the way that we work with brands is, of course, we understand what their mission is, what it is they're looking to communicate to their consumers in terms of sustainability. And then we hit the ground running. We try to find what's going to be the most sustainable types of packages, how we can set up a supply chain that is as local as possible or has minimal amount of emissions to it. So a good example of this is a brand that we worked with a couple of years ago called The Good Pea, and they wanted to launch a pea protein based product in the UK. And at that point, you know, we learned that majority of the world's supply chain is actually via Canada and China. So a lot of the pea protein is actually grown in Canada, and then it's sent to China for manufacturing, and then it makes its way to wherever the market is, ultimately Western countries, right? So you're traveling around the world once or twice, which is really quite, you know, it's quite sad and unfortunate for a product that is so wonderful in its nitrogen fixation. And so we wanted to see if we could find other options, and we were able to in Europe, where we found a brand that has a really nice sell story. It was like, you know, absolutely beautiful, like windmills as part of their factory, all very renewable sources. And because we were sourcing everything on a pretty local scale, some of the ingredients that were involved in the project that were from abroad were, of course, sent on sea freight, so the most optimal form of transportation. And we were able to produce a product that has, you know, much better sustainability footprint than a lot of the other leaders in the marketplace. So that's just an example of how we would formulate a product and set up a supply chain. And then also on the packaging side, we put the product into a Tetra Pak, which is a good sustainability option for also on the food waste side, which is something a lot of people tend to forget about, at least in my experience. So that's a really good way of keeping a long shelf life product. You know, you've got a year shelf life, you've got a low amount of food waste. On the consumer side too, when it's in a Tetra Pak, you can often get perishability of around 7 to 10 days, depending on a product. So these are all really good ways of trying to take what currently exists in the infrastructure of food and beverage industry and optimizing it based on the opportunities that are available and on an industrial scale to produce a product that has a better sustainability footprint.
That's awesome. I think, yeah, thinking about the whole life cycle is really what sustainability is about. And I think people often just think about packaging, but there's so much more. And I think we always ask our clients when they do want to have, you know, go after sustainability, we're like, well, how would you define that? And how does that play into your entire product life cycle, including packaging? That's just one element. So yeah, through the whole process, you kind of have to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on the R&D side, for us, we spend so much time focusing on the briefs and making sure our briefs are incredibly clear. So when we're working with different suppliers, as I'm based in London, Ella's based in the Netherlands, but we have clients globally. So it's, you know, very global supply chains we're working with. And a lot of our clients, you know, are doing this as their, you know, ad hoc job. It's their hobby. It's sort of their side passion. So we're getting samples, of course, you know, sent from these laboratories around the world to their location. So if we can keep the brief incredibly clear and with our expertise on formulation, a lot of the time we get the first round of formulas and they're very, very close to the final product. You know, typically it's like the second round is when we're like, okay, this is good to go. Of course, there are other situations where we might have stability problems or, lovely R&D challenges that can come our way. But a lot of the time we put so much effort on everything on paper first, get everything incredibly clear there, so that way we can deliver something that we're not doing 100 different rounds of R&D and wasting of ingredients. And then when we get to scaling it up, we've already spoken with different co-packers and gotten different insights that we're more or less, successful with getting this product out the door. And again, having the least amount of wastage as possible during that process. A lot of people forget that there can be so much wastage in the R&D process. Doing commercial trials of beverages, and you could be throwing 10,000 liters worth of a product down the drain. So if we can put a lot of attention on these things, make sure that, the co-packers and the network around us, is trusted and verified, we can try to keep, the things that we can control, of course, in sort of a good manner to yield a product that's got that sustainability halo around it.
Awesome.
That makes sense.
What would you suggest for brands who are just kind of starting out and wanting to make their, and this is another loaded question, so to try to figure out how I can deduce it down to a little bit more simple. I guess it's suggestions for brands that are in their early startup stages. They are wanting to provide a sustainable brand, which can, especially in the packaging, depending on how you go, get expensive. So do you have any suggestions for, ways to start small, ways to start incorporating that from the beginning in a way that, early stage founders can really within their means at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a, conversation I have all the time with my clients. Unfortunately, things are expensive in this space. So I would say you have to really narrow in on what you want to deliver. So what is the positioning? What is your mission? And I always like to give people the analogy that you're getting married. You need to have 3 to 5 things that are your core. And as we go through the innovation process, you're going to have to compromise along the way. So if you can always go back to that list and see if those 3 to 5 things are that core piece of the business, then that can help navigate you through these challenges that we'll have. But if you want, packaging to be ultra sustainable, then just know that it's going to cost a lot. So you have to budget for it. You have to plan that from the beginning. And you have to make that utterly clear in the brief. We have to be able to deliver all the different options that are commercially available, but know that things are not perfect. There's still a lot that's happening behind the scenes with product development for more sustainable options. But the options that are on the table right now, are still getting the kinks worked out on that cost side. As there's more economies of scale, the costs will go down. So just know that if you are a brand that wants to play in that space, attract other brands that want to play in that space too, and hopefully the cost will make its way down one time or another.
That's great. That's great advice. Thank you. Okay, so just some general questions. So we don't, we're kind of getting close to our time here, so I just want to get some fun questions for you. Do you have any favorite? It could be brands you work with or just brands in general in this industry that you feel like are doing a fantastic job and that you just are kind of look to for inspiration.
Good one. Yeah, there's so many brands.
There are.
Hard to think of them, of course, now. But no, there's a lot of brands out there that I think are really making a lot of changes, especially when it comes to technology and just, changing the way that consumers eat. I think is really going to be exciting for this next round of 5 to 10 years out. The way that we're cooking at home, projects that I know on that have not yet launched, which is why I'm not brands, but it's really exciting stuff of how we can use technology to change the way we eat at home, cut down on time, cut down on tediousness when it comes to chopping ingredients, and delivering high quality nutritional products.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I think that seeing the changes in general, right? We have, better for you becoming just everything. It's kind of, we say, is almost like the new standard, right? I feel like most products coming out in some way, shape, or form are better for you, and not all, but a lot of them. And then, yeah, cooking at home is an interesting one. That's exciting.
Yeah. Even on the flip side, using technology on the factory side. We use, different types of fermentation. I think the fermentation space is so interesting, and that ties into gut health, of course, but there's just different ways of making products that we've already historically done for hundreds of thousands of centuries, basically, and focusing on different ingredients that we can use fermentation models for. Some of them, of course, are precision fermentation, tissue cultivation, biomass fermentation. That's all really interesting what's happening in that space. And those startups are, blooming every day. There's more and more startups out in Silicon Valley, Singapore, all the major hubs, London. So what those brands are doing is very interesting. I think the big focus on their landscape right now, of course, has been for the high yield when it comes to greenhouse gases and from a sustainability side. So a lot of animal-based products, essentially, it simmers down to. And I think the next wave of when we're looking at products that have always been unfortunately targeted by natural disasters. So coffee supply chains, honey is of course under pressure, vanilla always under pressure, and how we can make those products in a more sustainable way. I think that is really interesting. I forgot the name of the startup, but there's a couple companies out in Germany that are focusing on these ingredients and making them through fermentation. And it's so interesting because we don't want them to leave our diets, but we also have such a high demand for the amount of supply output right now. And it's only going to be continued to have more and more pressure on these supply chains and on agricultural output. So if we can find other methods of creating these products and still delivering on taste, quality, and nutrition, I'm all supporting of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a lot to look forward to, and there are a lot of people who are working on really incredible solutions. That's something that I'm always inspired by as well. It's just, people coming up with better ways to do things. So yeah. All right, Natalie. Well, where can everyone find you and reach out to you if they, want to work with you, all of that good stuff?
Good. Yeah. Multiple ways to reach out through our Instagram, Nali Consulting, or of course through our website, so naliconsulting.co.uk. Those are great ways to go through our forms or go through the Instagram to get in touch with us and see how we can support.
Awesome. Thank you so much for chatting with us. I think this was information packed. So hopefully people get a lot out of this one. And yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.